Johnny Depp has long been an enigma in Hollywood, a man who, despite the accolades, fortune, and decades-long stardom, has always carried a haunting sense of distance behind his eyes. In a candid revelation, Depp now confesses in a new documentary how fame devoured him at a young age, leaving behind a trail of internal scars that fame and fortune could never heal. His words have struck a chord with millions around the world, not because they're flashy or scandalous, but because they reveal a raw truth that few stars are willing to acknowledge. That stardom, in all its glory, often comes with a heavy, emotional price. From the outside looking in, Johnny Depp's rise to fame seemed like a dream. Born in Owensboro, Kentucky, and raised in a nomadic household, he was the quintessential American boy with a troubled soul. He dropped out of high school to pursue music, never envisioning that his detour into acting would make him a household name. His big break came with the television series 21 Jump Street in the late 1980s. For many, this would be a golden ticket. For Depp, it was the beginning of a deeply conflicted relationship with celebrity culture. As he reveals in the documentary, he never wanted to be a teen idol. He despised the posters, the screaming crowds, and the fabricated image that studios forced him into. It was never about the craft, it was about selling a face. And that, he says, began to eat away at him. Depp describes the early years of his career as a time of intense confusion and emotional unrest. At just 24, he was already feeling the burden of global fame, and he quickly realized that the industry didn't care much about who he really was. "I was a product," he says solemnly in one of the interview clips. "They sold my face, my style, my name, but nobody knew me, and I didn't even know myself." It's a chilling reflection from someone who had the world at his feet, but felt as if he was standing on sinking sand. He confesses that he would often stare into the mirror, asking himself whether the person staring back was even real anymore. The documentary delves deep into Depp's struggle with identity, shaped and distorted by the bright lights of Hollywood. As he recalls, he tried to rebel against the mainstream from the very start. He deliberately took roles that were eccentric and unconventional, characters like Edward Scissorhands, Ichabod Crane, and Raoul Duke, because he wanted to escape the polished poster boy image that had been forced upon him. These roles became his armor, his method of survival in an industry that demanded conformity. Yet even in the sanctuary of these characters, he could not entirely run from the void that fame had created within him. Depp also opens up about the emotional toll his fame took on his relationships. He admits that maintaining genuine human connections became nearly impossible once he became a global star. Friends grew distant, lovers misunderstood him, and the paparazzi turned every aspect of his life into public spectacle. The constant scrutiny, the rumors, and the betrayals chipped away at his trust in people. He describes how isolating it felt to walk into a room and see people smiling at him, only to realize those smiles were rooted in admiration for the celebrity, not the person. He says, "They loved Johnny Depp, not me, and I couldn't always tell the difference." The loss of privacy was another devastating consequence of his early fame. Depp recounts how, as a young man, he could no longer enjoy the simple pleasures of life, going to a cafe, sitting in a park, taking a walk, without being mobbed or photographed. The intrusion became so relentless that he began to feel like a prisoner in his own success. Fame, he explains, is like a beautiful cage. It looks alluring from the outside, but inside it's lonely, it's cold, and the walls keep getting taller. He says there were days when he wished he could vanish, just to breathe freely again. In perhaps the most emotional part of the documentary, Depp talks about how fame impacted his mental health. He speaks of the anxiety that crept into his life, like a shadow, slowly darkening his thoughts. He battled insomnia, self-doubt, and an overwhelming sense of disconnection. "I had everything people dream about," he says, "but I felt emptier than I ever thought possible." He admits that he turned to substances at various points, not to escape responsibility, but to mute the noise inside his head. The pressure to constantly perform, to live up to an image that wasn't even his own, became unbearable. As the documentary explores Depp's descent into the more chaotic chapters of his life, the tabloid controversies, the legal battles, the failed relationships, can be traced back to this deep, unresolved trauma. Fame, which had been gifted to him like a crown, slowly turned into a chain, Every misstep he made was magnified, every word scrutinized, and yet he says the worst part wasn't the judgment from the world, it was the silence he felt from within. You start to lose your voice, he says, because the world is so loud. What's particularly striking is Depp's humility throughout the documentary. He doesn't paint himself as a victim, nor does he blame others for his struggles. Instead, he presents himself as someone trying to make sense of a life that spun out of control too quickly. He expresses gratitude for his career and the love he's received from fans, but he also urges young artists to understand the double-edged nature of fame. It's not all champagne and red carpets, he warns. It's sacrifice, and sometimes it's soul-crushing. The film also touches on Depp's journey toward healing. He speaks of finding solace in art, in music, and in quiet moments away from the spotlight. He has spent recent years reconnecting with himself, peeling away the layers that Hollywood had piled onto him. He talks about his children as his anchor, their existence reminding him of what's truly important. His eyes light up when he mentions them, and it's perhaps the only time in the documentary where he seems at peace. Being a father, he says, brought him back to earth. Depp's confession has resonated widely because it shatters the illusion that success guarantees happiness. In truth, his story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked fame and the fragility of identity in a world obsessed with image. He urges fans to look beyond the glamour, to understand that behind every smiling celebrity is a human being wrestling with their own demons. His honesty in this documentary has opened up a broader conversation about mental health in the entertainment industry, a topic that has long been ignored or romanticized. Critics have praised the documentary for its intimate and unfiltered portrayal of a man often misunderstood by the public. Instead of focusing on the scandals or the legal drama that has followed him in recent years, the film gives space to the inner life of Johnny Depp, the boy who became a star before he could understand what that truly meant. Through tears, laughter, and long pauses, he recounts the price he paid for fame, and in doing so, he reclaims a part of himself that had been lost for decades. As the documentary closes, Depp reflects on what he would tell his younger self if he had the chance. "I'd tell him to slow down," he says, "to listen more, to not be afraid to say no, and to remember that who you are is more important than who the world wants you to be." These final words linger long after the screen fades to black, a poignant reminder that even the brightest stars cast shadows. Johnny Depp's story is not just about the perils of fame, it's about resilience. It's about a man who, after being chewed up and spit out by an unforgiving industry, chose to confront his past and speak his truth. In doing so, he has offered a mirror to others trapped in the same cycle, reminding them that healing is possible and that it's never too late to rediscover who you are beneath the fame. For decades, Depp had been living within the construct of a carefully curated image, from the eccentric characters he portrayed to the deeply private demeanor he maintained in interviews. He became a master at concealing his true self. But the price of that concealment wasn't just creative, it was personal. Over time, the layers of false identity became so thick that peeling them away meant revisiting traumas he had long buried. It meant acknowledging not only the pain caused by the industry, but also the ways in which he had internalized the pressures and expectations that came with being a global icon. His story, in this light, becomes a powerful example of what it means to face your past, not as a victim, but as a survivor. Depp's resilience was not born out of a single moment of clarity. It was the culmination of years spent confronting pain in silence. The media has often painted him as a volatile, mysterious figure, haunted by addiction and drama. But beneath those headlines is a man who has, time and again, found the courage to pick himself up and keep going. Whether it was through his commitment to fatherhood, his music, or the occasional return to roles that reignited his passion, Depp has managed to find slivers of light in some of his darkest chapters. He never fully disappeared from public life, but for many years he lived in a kind of emotional exile, present but not truly seen. One of the most compelling aspects of his journey is how he has gradually allowed the world to see behind the mask. In an industry that often demands perfection, vulnerability is a rare and powerful currency. Depp's decision to speak openly about his struggles, whether in courtrooms, interviews, or documentaries, is not an attempt to gain sympathy, but a radical act of reclamation. He is not asking to be absolved of his mistakes, nor is he shifting blame. Instead, he is drawing a line between the mythology built around him and the reality of his human experience. That distinction matters deeply because it signals a desire not just for redemption, but for authenticity. This authenticity resonates especially in a world where so many public figures are sculpted into marketable brands. Depp's candidness breaks the mold. He doesn't offer neatly packaged lessons or motivational sound bites. What he offers is messier, more human, and ultimately more relatable. It's the story of someone who was idolized before he fully knew who he was. It's the story of someone who made choices, some right, some wrong, while millions watched. And it's the story of someone who now, later in life, is learning to exist without constantly needing to perform or please. Resilience, in Depp's case, is not about indestructibility, it's about enduring and, more importantly, about evolving. He speaks now with a tone that suggests a deeper awareness of life's fragility. He recognizes that the fame he once resented also gave him a platform, and he's using that platform to talk about the emotional and psychological toll of being. Dehumanized by celebrity culture, he's no longer just an actor or a musician. He's become a witness to the unseen costs of fame, and in sharing his truth, he gives permission for others to acknowledge their own battles, no matter how different the circumstances may be. In many ways, his life has mirrored the roles he gravitated toward: damaged, complex, misunderstood characters who live on the fringes of society. But where once these roles served as an escape, they now seem to reflect a full-circle moment in his personal development. Depp has stopped hiding behind personas and started embracing the man behind the myth. That process has not been smooth. There have been legal battles, public fallouts, and the constant glare of media attention. But through it all, he has shown an uncanny ability to keep walking forward, even when every step has been scrutinized. What makes Depp's narrative particularly poignant is how it intersects with themes of forgiveness, both of oneself and of others. In interviews, he has hinted at regrets, not just about how others treated him, but about how he reacted to pain and pressure. These reflections are not delivered with self-pity, but with a clarity that suggests hard-earned wisdom. He speaks now of choosing battles more carefully, of finding peace in the smaller moments, and of living for the things that truly matter: his art, his children, his sense of self. For his fans, many of whom have followed him since the early days, this evolution has been both heartbreaking and inspiring. They've seen their idol at his highest and lowest. They've watched him transform from the rebellious heartthrob of Crybaby and Edward Scissorhands to a man weathered by the realities of time and scrutiny. Yet they've remained fiercely loyal, perhaps because Depp's story feels deeply human. It's not a fairy tale. It's a testament to survival. And that survival is what elevates his journey from one of fame to one of meaning. He could have vanished completely from the spotlight. He could have let bitterness consume him. But instead, Johnny Depp has chosen to engage with life again, on his own terms. He has chosen to be present, not as a caricature, but as a man who has endured great pain and found the strength to keep going. He has chosen to speak, not for applause, but for connection. In doing so, he is redefining what it means to be a public figure. No longer just a movie star or a misunderstood icon, Depp has become a voice of reflection in an age of noise. His story reminds us that the people we elevate are still human, that fame is not armor, and that healing is not weakness. It is a choice, and it is a journey. Johnny Depp's confession, then, is more than just a moment of emotional honesty. It is a reckoning. It is an invitation to look at fame not through the lens of envy, but through the eyes of those who have lived it. And perhaps most importantly, it is a reminder that resilience is not about bouncing back unchanged. It is about coming back different, wiser, and more rooted in who you truly are. In rediscovering himself, Johnny Depp has done what few celebrities ever managed to do. He has transcended his own myth and become something far more powerful, real. To understand the gravity of Depp's transformation, one must first understand the depth of the myth that surrounded him. For decades, he was more than just an actor. He was a symbol of rebellion, artistic freedom, and eccentric genius. From the moment he stepped into Hollywood's spotlight, there was a mystique about him, an enigmatic allure that set him apart. from the more conventional leading men of his time, but that mystique, while intoxicating to the public, came at a cost. It demanded that he keep up appearances, remain elusive, and maintain a persona that was often more fiction than fact. The Johnny Depp the world thought they knew was in many ways a creation shaped by the media, the film industry, and the expectations of fans who craved the unpredictability he so effortlessly exuded. Over time, the disconnect between who he was and who the world believed him to be became emotionally exhausting. Living within the confines of a public identity that felt increasingly disconnected from his inner life took its toll. He was no longer just playing roles on screen. He was playing one in real life too. The charm, the mystery, the tortured artist. Trope, it all became a mask, one that shielded him from vulnerability but also kept him from healing. Fame can be a seductive trap, offering validation and attention while quietly stripping away authenticity and self-worth. Depp, like so many others before him, found himself caught in that web. But what makes his journey unique is the decision to stop hiding. Instead of continuing the charade, Depp chose to pull back the curtain. He began to share the less glamorous sides of his life, the emotional scars, the betrayals, the pain of being misunderstood. This wasn't a carefully staged PR campaign or a bid for sympathy. It was raw, unfiltered truth-telling from someone who had reached a breaking point and decided that silence no longer served him. That kind of honesty is rare in Hollywood, where images are polished to perfection and vulnerability is often seen as weakness. Depp's willingness to expose his wounds publicly was not just brave, it was necessary. This reckoning allowed him to shed the layers of fiction that had built up around him. He no longer needed to be the brooding outsider or the charming rogue. He could just be himself in all his complexity. That meant acknowledging not only the ways he had been hurt, but also the ways he had contributed to his own suffering. It meant reflecting on past choices, facing uncomfortable truths, and doing the difficult work of self-examination. There is a quiet strength in admitting your flaws without allowing them to define you. Depp's confession was not an end. It was a beginning. Through this process of reckoning, he began to rebuild. Not in the sense of returning to some idealized version of his past, but by constructing a new foundation based on authenticity. His relationships began to reflect this change. He became more present for his children, more honest with his collaborators, and more deliberate about the projects he chose to pursue. No longer driven by the need to prove anything, he found freedom in doing only what resonated with him. The roles he began to take on mirrored this shift, less about spectacle and more about substance, less about reinvention, and more about alignment with his evolving self. This transformation wasn't instant, nor was it without setbacks. Healing, especially in the public eye, is a messy and non-linear process. Every step forward was met with scrutiny, every misstep magnified, but what stood out was his unwavering commitment to truth. He didn't retreat when things got hard. He didn't lash out in bitterness. Instead, he held his ground and let his actions speak louder than the noise around him. That kind of quiet defiance, grounded in self-respect rather than ego, is the mark of someone who has truly changed. And in changing, Depp did something truly rare. He transcended the myth. Most celebrities, once wrapped in the fabric of public imagination, become trapped in it forever. Their legacy is defined by their peak moments, their most iconic roles, or their most infamous scandals. But Depp, by choosing vulnerability over performance, managed to break free from that mold. He ceased to be just a symbol or a character and became a human being who had suffered, survived, and grown. That authenticity struck a chord with many who had watched his rise and fall with both admiration and concern. There's something deeply powerful about watching someone reclaim their narrative after it's been hijacked by others. Depp's confession reminded the world that even those who seem larger than life are still subject to the same emotional tides as anyone else. It dismantled the illusion of celebrity invincibility and replaced it with a more profound truth, that real strength lies not in pretending to be perfect, but in owning your imperfections and continuing to move forward anyway. In choosing to be real, Depp has offered something more valuable than entertainment. He has offered connection. His story encourages others to confront their own myths, to question the narratives they've internalized, and to believe in the possibility of transformation. He's not the same man he was at the height of his fame, and that's precisely what makes his journey so compelling. Because in a world obsessed with image, Johnny Depp chose substance. In a culture that celebrates reinvention, he chose revelation. And in doing so, he reminded us all that it's never too late to come home to yourself. As audiences around the world continue to watch and reflect on Depp's emotional testimony, one thing becomes clear. This is not a farewell, nor a plea for sympathy. It is a reckoning. A man once silenced by the roar of fame is finally finding his voice, and in that voice, cracked with pain but rich with wisdom, we hear a story that belongs not just to Johnny Depp, but to every soul who has ever felt lost in the noise of the world.